The story will be told from the perspective of the main female character.
It was midnight when I got a text from my parents. Just like that, my phone lit up with a message that hit me like a brick. "We know you spent $510,000 to save our house, but your sister doesn't want you at Thanksgiving." No call, no. Let's talk about this. Nothing. Just that cold line staring back at me in the middle of the night. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed one word. Noted. And just like that, I quietly closed the chapter on being the family doormat. What happened next? Well, their perfect Thanksgiving fell apart without me even lifting a finger. And that was just the start. For most of my life, being the responsible one wasn't something I chose. It just sort of landed on me. My days are predictable, organized, calm. The exact opposite of my family. I grew up in a house where keeping the peace mattered more than logic, and keeping the peace usually meant covering for my younger sister. She was the golden child from the moment she could talk, bright, charming, magnetic. Adults practically handed her praise without her doing anything to earn it. She didn't ask for things, she expected them. And my parents always delivered. If she messed up, they cushioned the fall. If she spent too much, they covered it. If she hurt someone's feelings, they'd tell her she was just expressive. Meanwhile, I learned to stay calm, be useful, dependable. Over time, I became the fixer, the one who handled broken appliances, busted budgets, and empty promises. My name was always the emergency contact. Not out of duty, but because the alternative was watching everything fall apart. 6 months ago, things almost did. My parents called me, voice shaking, practically in tears. They were behind on the mortgage for the lakefront house they'd lived in for decades. And of course, my sister had been borrowing money again, this time draining their retirement fund for her impulsive shopping and half-baked business ideas. On top of that, my parents had made a few bad financial moves, hopping to fix things quietly. They were just weeks away from losing the house. I didn't hesitate. I liquidated investments I'd been building for 15 years, sold a rental condo I'd worked so hard on, and moved money I'd planned to use for my future. By the end, I'd wired them $510,000, no questions asked. My attorney insisted we put the agreement in writing to protect everyone. My parents, desperate and grateful, signed every page without hesitation. For a few months, things seemed stable again. My sister went back to her usual rhythm, designer clothes, flashy updates, new career ideas every other week. My parents shrugged it off as her finding herself, the same excuse they'd used for years. And I told myself it wasn't my place to intervene anymore. But even with that decision, a small knot of unease lingered in my chest. Little things kept nudging me. The way conversations happened without me, photos I wasn't in, vacations I was never asked about. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it wasn't my business. Yet deep down, I knew I was still part of the story, whether they wanted me there or not. All that restraint, all that denial, collapsed the night they sent that text. The night they told me I wasn't welcome at Thanksgiving. And why? Because my sister didn't want me there. I must have read that message a dozen times. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I couldn't believe how casually it was delivered, like it was no big deal. Like telling me not to come was the same as reminding me to bring dessert. For a moment, I just sat there, completely still. I waited for the usual wave of excuses in my head, the habit of defending them, rationalizing their behavior, shrinking myself so my sister could stay comfortable. I waited for the guilt, the voice whispering, "They didn't mean it like that." But something else came up instead, a quietness, the kind that comes just before a storm hits. Then my phone buzzed again. This time it was my sister. Short message, sharp, almost bored. "It's not personal. I just want a smooth evening. You can be intense. Let's grab lunch next week." Intense. I stared at that word. Blurrier and blurrier, I realized, according to her, I was intense. Not when I sold my condo so my parents wouldn't lose the house. Not when I covered her credit card mess silently. Not when I drove 2 hours at midnight to bail her out after yet another failed business attempt. But now, I was intense because I existed in a way she couldn't control. Something unfamiliar climbed up my spine. Clarity. I typed one word back, noted. Not angry, not sarcastic, just final. And for the first time in years, that one word didn't feel like giving up. It felt like a boundary snapping into place. It felt like choosing myself. I set my phone down and walked across my loft, the hardwood floor cool under my feet. I opened the small safe I rarely touched. Inside was a thin folder, heavy with meaning. Months ago, when I paid off the house, my attorney had drafted a formal agreement, not out of distrust, just for protection. My parents, emotional and shaking, had signed every page. Barely reading, they just clutched my hands and said I saved them. That folder held every signature, every clause, every timeline, including the one giving them 6 months to either buy the house back at market value or start paying rent. 6 months. And Thanksgiving marked the last week. For years, my family had relied on me never pushing back, always being the reliable one, the forgiving one, the easy one. But as I stood there, folder in hand, I realized something simple. They had mistaken my silence for acceptance. And this time, they were going to learn the difference. The folder felt heavier than paper should. Maybe because it held every quiet sacrifice I'd made, every boundary I'd never set, every apology I'd swallowed. I carried it to my desk and laid it flat, pages glowing softly in my loft. For years, I'd convinced myself that if I stayed patient, generous, and reasonable enough, things would eventually shift. That one day, my parents would see the difference between love and convenience. But staring at that agreement, I felt something settle inside me. They already had all the proof. They just chose not to look. I opened my laptop, pulled up a digital folder labeled records. Screenshots, payments, bank statements showing every transfer from my parents' accounts to cover my sister's spending. I never collected them to use against anyone. I just wanted to stop being the only witness to the truth. The silence around me thickened, almost electric. My phone buzzed again, another message from my sister, but I didn't pick it up. Instead, I called my attorney. "Everything okay?" he asked, groggy. "No," I said calmly. "But it will be. I need to start the process." A pause. "The house?" "Yes. Send the notice before Thanksgiving." I could hear the moment he assessed if I really meant it. "You're sure?" "I'm done being taken for granted," I said, steadier than I felt. And it felt right, solid, anchored. After the call ended, I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My loft felt lighter, even though nothing around me had changed. The change was inside. For the first time, a boundary ignored for years finally took shape. Thanksgiving morning arrived, the kind of foggy Seattle morning that makes the lake look like it's quietly breathing. But inside my parents' house, there was no calm. My sister had been up since dawn, making sure every detail of her perfect holiday was just right. She had invited colleagues from work, people she wanted to impress, to show she was more successful, more organized, and more accomplished than she actually was. She moved around the kitchen like she owned it, checking table settings, giving instructions to my mom and dad, curling her hair just so, and even telling Dad how to act natural when the guests arrived. My parents floated around her, exhausted but trying to keep up, completely unaware of what was about to happen. They didn't know a delivery had been scheduled, something that wasn't food, flowers, or decorations. I wasn't at home nursing hurt feelings or sulking. I was exactly where I needed to be, quiet, private, far enough away to think without the weight of their expectations pressing down on me. Back at the house, the doorbell rang. My sister adjusted her dress and said, "Mom, get that. It's probably the last dessert order." It was. At the door was a man in a plain jacket holding a sealed envelope and a flat package. "I have documents for your parents," he said politely. Mom blinked, confused. "Oh, that must be something else we forgot to order." He handed her the envelope, asked for a signature, and left without any fuss. No drama, no shouting, just a calm delivery of consequences. Dad came over and frowned at the legal header on the envelope. This is from your attorney." The room went silent. Recognition flickered in their eyes, but no one spoke. "Open it," my sister said lightly, still smiling. Maybe it's nothing. But when they tore the envelope open, her smile faltered. Inside were 3 sets of documents, a formal reminder of the agreement they had signed, a notice marking the end of the 6-month grace period, and a detailed summary of every payment, bill, and bank transfer that had covered her spending habits and failed business ventures. Every payment traced back to me. Mom's hands shook as she unfolded each page. "Rent, market value starting immediately," she whispered. Dad skimmed through the text, color draining from his face. "This we have to buy the house back," he stammered. My sister stepped forward, grabbing a page. "What do you mean rent? This is our home." "It hasn't been for 6 months," Dad said quietly. "She owns it now." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Even her supervisor, standing there, looked stunned. Mom tried to calm things down. "She won't actually enforce this. She's just upset." Then my sister reached the final page, the one with the timeline. Thanksgiving Day. That was the deadline. Not next week, not next month. Today. And she noticed the signature at the bottom, her own. "What is this? I didn't sign anything." Dad's voice snapped, breaking for the first time in years. "You signed as a witness the day she paid off the mortgage. You were right there. You said you'd read it later." Her face went pale. Her supervisor adjusted his glasses, scanning the document, clearly taking in the evidence. Mom turned to Dad, alarmed. Call her right now." They tried. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. I watched quietly from where I was. By the time they were frantically redialing, my phone had over 30 missed calls. I finally answered, calm. "Hello. We received something. You didn't need to do this. Not today, not like this," Dad said, voice breaking. "I respected your request not to come," I replied simply. Mom jumped in, voice cracking. "Sweetheart, please, this is a misunderstanding." My sister cut in sharply, grabbing the phone. "This is insane. You're ruining Thanksgiving. You're ruining my reputation in front of my coworkers." There it was, not regret, not apology, embarrassment. "This isn't about your reputation," I said. "This is about accountability." "Accountability? You're punishing us," she snapped. "No," I said. "You punished yourselves. I'm just enforcing what we all agreed to." For a long moment, no one spoke. I could hear the clatter of dishes, the quiet shock rippling across the room, the realization that the person they had always taken for granted had stopped playing the assigned role. Dad finally exhaled, surrendering. "What do we do now?" he asked. "You have 2 options," I said evenly. "Buy the house back or start paying rent." "This is impossible," my sister whispered. "You know we can't afford either." "You could have," I said quietly. "If you hadn't drained their accounts, used credit lines, or pretended expenses were investments." Her supervisor's eyes widened, clearly seeing the evidence too. Mom's voice cracked. "You're doing this on purpose. You want to humiliate me." "I don't," I said softly. "But I will no longer protect you from the truth. This Thanksgiving was meant to be your perfect day, and now you're facing everything you worked so hard to hide. That's what happens when real consequences arrive." I could feel all 3 of them holding their breath. I ended the call with the same steadiness I had when I read that text. I'm done being taken for granted. And I hung up. Across the lake, the facade of the perfect family gathering had collapsed. Not because I fought, but because I finally stopped carrying the weight of their choices. Thanksgiving morning came with that thick, gray Seattle fog, the kind that makes the lake look like it's breathing. But inside the house, nothing was peaceful. She had been up since dawn, making sure everything looked perfect for the holiday she was determined to impress everyone with. She had invited colleagues she wanted to convince that she was more successful, more stable, and more accomplished than she actually was. She wore a cream-colored dress, her hair curled just right, and moved through the kitchen giving orders, fixing table settings, and quietly correcting Mom's placement of silverware. She even reminded Dad to act natural when her guests arrived. Mom and Dad floated around her, half exhausted, half proud, completely unaware of what was coming. They didn't know there was a delivery scheduled. No flowers, no extra food, not even decoration, something else. And they didn't know I wasn't at home feeling hurt or brooding. I was exactly where I needed to be, in my own quiet space, far enough away to hear my own thoughts without the weight of their expectations pressing down on me. I checked the time. 11:42 a.m., right on schedule. Back at the lake house, her colleagues started to arrive, 2 from her firm, one being her direct supervisor. They complimented the decor she claimed to have done all by herself. She soaked in their praise, smiling and glowing at every word. Mom leaned over to a guest and whispered almost apologetically, "Our older daughter isn't coming today. She needed space." The same soft tone she always used to shield and protect, to make mistakes seem harmless. Then the doorbell rang. A simple sound, but it split the day in half. "Mom, get that," she said, fixing her dress. "It's probably the last dessert delivery." It was. At the door stood a man in a plain jacket, holding a sealed envelope and a flat package. "I have documents for your parents," he said politely. Mom blinked, confused. "Oh, that must be something we forgot to order." He handed her the envelope, asked for a signature, and left. No drama, no shouting, just quiet consequences arriving. Dad moved beside Mom, frowning when he saw the legal letterhead. This is from their attorney," he murmured. The room went silent, not because anyone understood yet, but because they recognized the name. "Open it," she said lightly, still smiling faintly. "Maybe it's nothing." But as the envelope tore open, the smile fell away. Inside were 3 sets of documents, a formal reminder of the agreement they had signed, a notice that the 6-month grace period had ended, and a detailed summary of every payment, bill, and transfer that had been made to rescue them financially. All of it traced back to me. Mom's hands shook as she unfolded the pages. "Rent," she whispered. "Market value starting immediately." Dad skimmed the letter, color draining from his face. "We have to buy the house back," he muttered. "It's not optional. We agreed to this." She stepped forward, snatching a page from his hand. "What do you mean rent? This is our home," she exclaimed. "It hasn't been for 6 months," Dad said quietly. "She owns it now." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Even her supervisor looked stunned. "You wouldn't really enforce this?" Mom asked, panic rising. "She's just upset," she said, but then her eyes fell on the final page detailing the timeline. Thanksgiving was the deadline. Not next week, not next month, today. And that's when she noticed something else. Her own signature at the bottom. "What is this? I didn't sign anything," she cried. "You did," Dad snapped, voice breaking. "You signed as a witness the day the mortgage was paid off. You were sitting right there. You said you'd read it later." Her face went pale. The supervisor adjusted his glasses and read more carefully. "You said your family situation was stable. You said you were supporting your parents through a temporary setback." I am. This is all a misunderstanding," she stammered, but he barely looked at her. His eyes stayed on the evidence. Transfers, withdrawals, payments covering her designer purchases and failed ventures, things she had claimed were from her own savings. Everything was unraveling too fast for her to stop it. Mom turned to Dad, alarmed. Call her right now." They tried. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. I watched silently, not moving. Then Dad tried again, then Mom, then she frantically dialing. By the time my phone stopped buzzing, over 30 missed calls were waiting. I answered calmly. "Hello." "My dear, we received. You didn't have to do this," Dad said, breathless. "Not today, not like this. You asked me not to come, and I respected that." Mom's voice cracked. "Sweetheart, please, this is a misunderstanding." She grabbed the phone, shouting, "You're ruining Thanksgiving. You're ruining my reputation in front of my coworkers." "This isn't about your reputation," I said. "It's about accountability." "Accountability? You're punishing us," she yelled. "No," I said. "You punished yourselves. I'm just enforcing what we all agreed to." For a moment, silence. I could hear the clatter of dishes, the shock in the room as they realized the person they always took for granted had stopped playing her role. Dad finally exhaled. "What do we do now?" he asked. You have two options, I said evenly. Buy the house back or start paying rent. This is impossible, she whispered. We can't afford either. You could, I said. If you hadn't drained their accounts, used credit lines in their names, or pretended your expenses were investments. Her supervisor's eyes widened as he saw the evidence too. You're doing this to humiliate me, she said. No, I said quietly, but I will no longer protect you from the truth. This Thanksgiving was meant to be your perfect day. Now you face the consequences of the choices you made. I hung up before anyone could speak again. Across the lake, I felt the weight lift. The perfect family facade collapsed, not because I fought, but because I finally stopped carrying their burden. In the following days, something shifted in the family. Silence fell, not the attention-seeking silence she used, but the silence of people forced to sit with the truth. Thanksgiving ended in fragments. Colleagues left early, uncomfortable. The supervisor barely looked at anyone as he left, the evidence still fresh in his mind. Parents called again, not to plead, but to ask questions they should have asked years ago. They started sorting their finances, realizing how much her spending had drained their stability. Shock turned into shame, and shame into accountability. For the first time, they couldn't ignore the pattern, couldn't pretend it was harmless, and they didn't ask me to fix it. I took long walks through Seattle that week, breathing clear air for the first time in years. I wasn't angry. I wasn't relieved. I felt balance. The world finally stopped tilting toward everyone else's needs. A week later, Dad asked for a meeting. No excuses, no guilt-tripping, just honesty. He admitted they had been blind. Relying on me had become too easy, too comfortable. Mom apologized without wrapping it in love or sacrifice, just admitting they failed to protect me while protecting her. They didn't know yet what would happen with the house. Neither did I. But for once, that uncertainty wasn't my burden. For the first time in my adult life, everyone was living with the consequences of their own choices. When they asked to meet again a week later, their voices were smaller, gentler, human in a way I hadn't heard in years. They didn't beg. They didn't bargain. They simply acknowledged the truth and were ready to rebuild without putting the weight on me. As for her, the silence said more than any apology could. For once, she faced questions, not hiding behind charm or excuses. And standing there, listening to my family finally speak honestly, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: real peace.